Kate, whenever you're ready. Welcome everybody to this afternoon's postdoc discussion. Our presenter, Katherine Myers-Coffman, PhD, MTBC, is presenting on experiences in coordinating multi-site clinical trials. Oh, we got one more person coming in. Let me invite him in before we actually get officially started. And take it away, Kate.
Cool, thank you. First of all, can I get an idea? I know, Jason and Kodal, you work with me on the study, but for the rest of you, can I get an idea of if you've ever coordinated a study, whether it's a single site study or a multi-site study, or just to kind of get an idea of how to tailor some of this content based on, if you are coming knowing nothing or you have some experience.
I'll jump in. I'm pretty excited. I know nothing, okay. But I am about to start a project that is a 21-site clinical trial, and so this is well timed.
Yes, awesome.
So I'm looking forward to the information.
And Kate, I don't know if you have the chat window open on your side. Fantastic. We've seen a couple that popped in there.
Tiffany said yes, to coordinate a single site, and Guy said yes, coordinate a single site. Bonnie, not coordinated, but presently part of a multi-site that just recently started. Okay, cool. And all right, sweet. All right, so for those that are coming knowing not a lot, okay, collected dissertation data in multiple nursing homes. Cool, very good. So I'll still give the bare bones since I know that we have some folks that haven't done it. Multi-site is definitely like a whole other beast than a single site, just because systems and infrastructures are so different. And I can talk about some of those pieces that I've experienced. So, oh, I realized I don't, okay, there we go. So I'll first talk about like my study coordination experience prior to getting the job that I have now, which is coordinating a multi-site clinical trial that's funded through an R01 mechanism. And then I'll orient you to the pain management support study, which is where the majority of my experiences are coming from. And then talk about the duties and some of the skills, some of the challenges and facilitators. And then since it's clear we have some folks that have coordinated different things, I'd love to just get other input, because I know, my experience may be very specific to a population or to, a specific setting. And, there's lots of differences and nuances across settings and populations. So during my doctoral studies here at Drexel, I actually did mostly teaching assistantships. And so I only had kind of a smaller research fellowship experience. And in it, I was able to help Dr. Yoka Brat put a study together at the Walter Reed Center for part of NICO, working with active duty members who have traumatic brain injury. And we were doing a neurobiology study with MRI machines. And it was the first time that I was ever told, this is what we need to do, just kind of start coordinating things. And it gave me a little understanding of just the different types of communication that you have, all the different team members that you start working with. But we didn't get very far in this study because the VA can be a little hard to work with. There's a lot of systems, and when people change over, things halt for a long time. At one point, there was a helium shortage, so they couldn't do the MRI. So certain things didn't let me get too deep into that study, but it was kind of my first experience. And then part of our doctoral program, I know it's shifted since some of you are in the program now, was a 3-quarter research practicum that I think it was like 24 hours each week. So it was a really intensive practicum, and I did mine stretched over about 1.5 years because I had mostly done qualitative experience and I wanted quantitative experience. And right at the time when I was putting my proposal together for this practicum, somebody that I used to do work with in Indianapolis had just gotten funded for the same R01 mechanistic study mechanism as what Yoka's study is now for music therapy and pediatric oncology. And so I said, can I just literally be a fly on the wall for everything, every meeting, everything, how you set everything up. And she had, this was Dr. Sherry Robb, and she had 3 sites all in different states. So everything was conducted remotely. Team meetings were all remote, communications were all remote. And so I really got to see, you know, I sat in on core executive team meetings, evaluator meetings, intervener meetings, site project manager meetings, and I got to help with quality assurance monitoring and learn how to do that. And so after doing that, that kind of got me well acclimated to being able to do the job that I have now, because at the time that Yoka got her R01, she had done multiple clinical trials, but never multi-site. So when she said, you know, will you apply for this position? Because I know that you have some experience, it was nice because I could say, well, this is what Sherry did in her study, and this is what we can do. It might be helpful. So I was able to have a lot of context because of that research practicum. And then my dissertation research started off as single site, but when that one site ended up not being the best place to be able to do it due to numerous reasons, I ended up going multi-site and doing 3 different sites in 3 different states. And I don't think that I would have felt comfortable doing that and setting that up if I hadn't had the prior experiences. So I did have all of this coming into my current position. So the study that I'm part of now, the pain management support study, is funded by the National Institute of Nursing Research. And we actually have kind of 2 studies. We have the R01, the main study, which we call the parent study, and that's funded over 3 years. And it's music-based versus verbal-based pain management support for patients with advanced cancer who have chronic pain. And then we were invited to submit a grant for an administrative supplement study, which is 1 year, taking the same music and verbal-based protocols, but trying to address chronic pain and cancer survivors and seeing, can we do something that will help decrease opioid use? And we work closely with doctors for opioid tapering during the program, not as in they're going to be completely taken off their opioids, but can we do something where we're, you know, helping them through the process of tapering and giving them, you know, emotional support either through the music-based or the verbal-based sessions. And so that was funded for a year, although obviously we've, as you'll hear, we were part of Hahnemann and we were, you know, COVID. And so all these fun little curveballs have been put in our place to kind of cause us to go a little bit longer, which is fine. It's kind of, you know, everybody has recruitment challenge targets, whether you don't lose an entire hospital and whether you don't have an entire pandemic come into play. But that's definitely been something for us. So for both of these, it's a mixed methods mechanistic study. So we have a hypothesized mediation model. We're collecting self-report data and biomarkers for the parent study, and self-report measures and medication use and decreasing dosages and stuff like that. And then we're doing qualitative interviews as well for both of those. So the study personnel that I work with, and this is kind of, this isn't everybody, but this is the majority of who I'm currently work with. And this whole layout has shifted significantly from when I first started on the study, because it used to just be Jefferson, Center City, and Hahnemann. And because of Hahnemann closing, we've had to add like 4 more sites and pull in more people. So Yoka's always been the PI. We've had the same site PI, Dr. Amy Leader, and the same site MD the whole time, Dr. Brooke Worcester. And so in having to add on so many more sites, we had to pull in more of our research fellows who were normally helping with other tasks to help us coordinate these various sites because we didn't have in the budget more than 2 study coordinators. So we had one at Jefferson, and then we've had Carolina Brill since the beginning of the study. And she was at Hahnemann and has since kind of shifted in different positions. So we have Carolina Brill as our site coordinator at Jefferson. She's a postdoc. Jacelyn Biondo is a postdoc who is taking on, we're adding Cancer Treatment Centers of America as another new site. We have research fellow Bridget Sutton helping out as study coordinator for our supplement study, and Carrie Catone as our site coordinator for Methodist, so that's a Jefferson hospital. And then Preeti Selvin was before the Jefferson personnel, but she's kind of spread out and helping with multiple different capacities. And then we have Mingyun Lau as a research fellow in Yoka's lab, who has kind of taken study coordinator roles in other positions, but he still helps a lot in our R01. And then we have our interveners. So we have our music therapist who's full-time and goes across all of the sites. And then we have per diem verbal interveners that are some of our, postdoc, research fellow. We've got some doc students from the psychology program. And so these are all the people that I most regularly communicate with. We still have other people that I don't talk to as often, such as like our statistician, the consultants that we have, our biomarker lab analyst, stuff like that. But this is kind of like in my weekly, this is who I'm talking with and coordinating. So it's a pretty big team of people to stay in contact with. So some of the duties, and I'll kind of start this from the beginning on if you're like conceptualizing a study and some of the things you might need to consider. So training manuals are a saving grace because you really need to have something that you can go to when you're teaching multiple people how to do multiple tasks. And for us, I created one for a study coordinator for myself in case anything were to happen or if I had to leave. Somebody could know exactly what I do in my daily procedures. We have site research coordinator manuals, and that's been very interesting because so many procedures differ from site to site that before we just had kind of an overarching manual for Hahnemann and Jefferson, but now that we've added another 3 sites in addition to those, and the infrastructures are different, we kind of have our broad instructions, but then site-specific instructions within that. So that will be, your consenting procedures, recruitment and referral procedures, data collection, patient communication, patient safety, quality assurance monitoring and reporting, adverse event reporting, things like that. Basically just everything that somebody can go back and, ask a question and go to the manual and find that information. We have a separate evaluator. We call it evaluator, but it's a data collector manual because we also, while our site research coordinators often do it, we've also had research fellows come in who don't do site research coordinator tasks, but will come and help out and do some of the quantitative and qualitative data collection. And then we have verbal and music intervener manuals. So some of these may be previously prepared, but I know at the time that I came on for this study, we didn't have the study coordinator, we didn't have the site research coordinator, we didn't have the evaluator manual. So I created those, which can take a long time. I think our evaluator manual alone is like 60 pages. So it can be very time consuming, but it's very helpful. We try to include script language, like example script in that so that people feel like they have, they don't need to go word by word for different structures, but they have a loose guideline for how to navigate different questions in different situations. As the study coordinator, I'm responsible for training everybody. And training can, I'd say for one role, training may take about 5 hours for each person because you have to orient to the entire study itself. We have a separate PowerPoint of just what is the study, what's the science, what's our design, what are we doing, what are our aims, and then you have the role-specific pieces. when we have new research fellows come in, it can take me 8 to 10 hours of training for those people because I'm training them in consenting, data collection, some coordination tasks and stuff like that. So the roles may be a bit more exhaustive. So for a frame of reference, I'm only on as study coordinator 20 hours a week. So you have to do a lot of time management when you consider if you get 2 new research fellows who are working on a study in a given year, and it takes you 10 hours to train each of those people. And so some of the strategies that we try to employ are a lot of mock sessions, a lot of role playing, and having people actually go through an entire thing. Like I'll teach somebody, you know, based on the content of the manual, and then I'll actually say things as I would to a patient or to a potential candidate on a study, and use the language and kind of the gestures and stuff that I do so that somebody can see an example of what that would look like. And then when I'm training them, there's a section where I'll say, okay, do a whole consent procedure with me, do a whole data collection procedure with me, do a qualitative interview with me. And then I can give feedback based on different things. And then at this point, because we're like 2.5 years into the study, and we've had, you know, like Cordola's been a site coordinator for the whole time. So sometimes I'll say, okay, now when you're done meeting with me, go meet with Cordola because she's done more consenting because she's with the patients more often. She can tell you what kinds of questions come up at any given point in time during the consent form, or some of the common things that can be challenges at this specific site. And so we try to also diversify the perspectives and get a well-rounded understanding. But I'd say the mock practicing is so essential because these manuals are big, they're intimidating, it's a lot of information to remember. It's really awkward. I don't know how many of you have done, you know, protocols with people in real time, but it can be very awkward, and you can get kind of disoriented if you're trying to be, you know, very present with the person, but then also wanting to stick to things because we do quality assurance based on those protocols. And so as many times, even when they've done stuff with me, I say, if you have somebody at home or if you have another student or another colleague that you can practice with, just run through this again, because the more you actually say it and do it, it's just going to help you. And so that's usually what we do for that. So I think I might ask a little bit after each section if there's any specific questions, which might be easier than waiting until the end. So if any questions arise for training manuals or training personnel, I'm happy to give experiences.
Okay, this is Bob Pellisano. So you've explained that you will orient and instruct people, it seems like one-to-one come on board. Is there any measures or any things that you've needed to sort of establish some type of reliability to assure that everyone is doing it the same way?
Yeah, so I'll get into that a little bit in our quality assurance monitoring, because that's exactly what we do. We have, you know, for our interventions, we have treatment fidelity checklists. We have fidelity checklists even for our data evaluators, because we audio record those as well and make sure that, you know, even though there may not be as many procedures that you need to stick with, there can be big differences between how you respond to somebody. You know, if somebody, you know, maybe isn't reading their own self-report measures, and maybe they forgot their glasses or they don't have enough, you know, ability to read their own questionnaires, some of the people will be reading to them. And if they give a response, are you going to say, oh, that's great, which can then give a little bit of a bias? Or if they ask a question about a certain, you know, statement on an item, and you say, well, I think they're talking about this. And we don't, you know, we try to have specific things in place where we have standard definitions for common things that are asked questions so that everybody gives the same responses so that there's as much consistency as possible. And so that kind of comes in the QA portion. And it's usually the first few people that we're kind of checking and constantly giving feedback on, and they'll do their own self quality assurance monitoring to hear themselves and go through the checklist, and then we'll have an external person do it. Then we'll come together and talk about it. So I'll go a little more in depth with that, but that's how we try to make sure that everybody's on par. And if you need more support or less support, how to navigate that. I think there was a chat. When are the manuals created in terms of grant timeline? I think that can differ based on when you get added on. So I remember Yoka getting the funding notice like real quick, and like the next day her study was funded. So she had to really quickly figure out, you know, who was going to be on her team. So even within the first month of getting funding, you know, she still didn't have everybody on the team hired. Whereas some people might be working on a team and do multiple grants together, and then you can kind of anticipate stuff based on a given score if you think your score is going to be funded. Or if you have previous studies, like I know Yoka is going to use a lot of the basis of the manuals we created this for future studies that you can tweak. So for us, it probably took me about the first 3 months to get all of our manuals together. And by that time, we kind of had ideas of how to get people hired and Drexel's system and cleared and, you know, good on compliance. So, and even then, within the first 3 months of actually employing the study, things changed. And I still to this day do constant revisions based on new things that we find. So I think manual creation can be different per study based on your team. If you're working with the same people, if you're creating a new team, when you hear about the grant funding, when you actually are awarded, when you hire people, stuff like that. So some more duties, lots of administrative pieces. For the IRB, I pretty much handle everything. Every amendment, every removal of anything, any conversation with IRB personnel, that's usually going through me. For us, it's been more exhaustive than it probably would be because we had Hahnemann closing. And then as we were trying to maintain recruitment levels without taking too much of a hit, we were constantly adding new sites. Each new site needs a supplement and a parent study consent form, and they need specific flyers. And, you know, so there's just certain things that you consider based on how many sites, like 21 different sites. Are you going to have the same consent forms for each one that has language that's all inclusive, or are you going to have specific information that's required to be on each consent form? Different promotional materials and stuff like that. If you have study cell phones based on, you know, if you're in the same city or, you know, somewhere else, you have different documents for every new cell phone. Or you can kind of give like a blank template that says, you know, insert phone number here, insert email here, which is a little bit easier. And then keeping all of the sites up to date. So anytime something's approved, sending it over to a different site and saying, please make sure that you delete this and have this revised version or whatnot. So that can be very tedious and detailed work to do. For the NIH, I think the biggest piece that I help with is the annual report each year, which Yoka and I usually try to start thinking about it a few months before it's due. And it depends on where you're at. Like our first year report didn't have a lot of information because it was really the study startup year, whereas our second year report, you know, we went and connected with our statistician and we got some interim results. And so we had to be able to do qualitative and quantitative analysis before we even submitted things. And so that was time consuming. And then the NIH has specific, you know, categories for how to prepare that. And then anytime that Yoka has conversations with the program officer. We try to keep that in a folder so that we have any decisions or support or evidence for, moving one way or another. For example, we just decided to move entirely through telehealth because we don't know when we'll be able to resume in-person sessions. But we needed to get approval from the PO, the program officer at that point. And she, needed to make sure, is this still within the scope of your project? It's not changing, your model, your outcomes and stuff like that. And making sure that we save those emails. So that's very on the administrative side. I don't know if that's kind of more self-explanatory, if there's any specific questions on that. Quality assurance monitoring. This takes up a lot of the time that I do things. So we have treatment fidelity checklists for the music sessions and the verbal sessions. We have all of our data collection sessions, and we have 4 time points, a baseline T2, T3, and T4 for the parent study, and then 3 time points for the supplement study. And so anybody who is a new evaluator and anybody who is a new intervener will have all of their sessions, like a full T1 to T4, 3 times fully, with me reviewing the quality assurance checklists so that we can give constant feedback. And that's how we've determined our level of meeting competency for having the protocol. For treatment sessions, that means 6 sessions for 3 people. So you can see that if it's an hour-long session, it can be time-consuming to do that, especially if you have multiple people at one time. And then after that, we have every if there's either a 3-month lapse or every 5th participant, we'll do another QA checklist just to make sure that no bad habits have been picked up in the time that people have been doing things. Or sometimes we have people asked to have the quality assurance monitoring because maybe they had kind of a tricky instance or situation where they want to get some feedback on. So I've had people request that. I also review the qualitative interviews when we have new reviewers and try to give feedback on those. And then we have QA, QI reviews, which quality assurance, quality information that we request from Drexel. And I think for NIH grants, if I recall correctly, you have to have one every 6 months. Yoka proposed in her grant that we'd get one every quarter. So we do a lot of work on this, and it can take a lot of time because basically it's an external audit on your study to make sure you're doing everything as you say you will in your study protocol. And so everything needs to be in REDCap. Everything needs to be, entered and verified. Every single log has to be updated. Every initial needs to be on every consent page. Every date needs to be, accurate and in line. Like the littlest details need to be ensured. And so usually I'll just kind of keep something in my calendar of like, okay, you got to request a QA, QI, and then I'll get the date and I'll tell everybody, I'm like, okay, you work on this, you work on this, you work on this, you work on this. And then I have a little checklist that I get together so that when I meet with the QA, QI reviewer, they'll spend an hour and they'll just randomly pick things and they'll tell us whether we're staying in line with our protocol and, Drexel IRB compliance requests. And if there's any actions that we have to do, like for example, one thing that once we started having different versions of our 503 document, the main study protocol, and then we had different versions of consent forms, they told us that we should be putting the date of the consent form and the version of the protocol that consent form is aligning with. And so it's a small, very small detail, but you can see that it's easy to be like, okay, so this, consent form goes with this version of the protocol, and that's where it's most in line. And so they'll look at kind of those nitty-gritty details, which means you really have to pay attention when you prep for these things. So lots of quality assurance monitoring overall. And I don't know if anybody has specific questions on that. I will give a context that our music sessions are video and audio recorded, and then our data collection and our verbal sessions are audio recorded. So we're always keeping track of those and listening through that. And then we create the fidelity checklists based on the protocol and the essential pieces that we want to make sure that somebody's hitting. Pretty good? All right. In this role, there's lots of opportunities for leadership, mentorship, and supervision. One of just like the basic ways of doing this is I'm in charge of leading weekly calls with our site research coordinators and just answering any questions, helping move meetings in certain directions. We have bi-weekly lab meetings that sometimes Yoko can't make, and so I'll be in charge of thinking of something that we can do for that lab meeting or presenting on a specific topic. More broadly, because there is a lot involved with leadership and mentorship, I know one of the things I've worked on myself is like considering leadership and mentorship styles. For example, a lot of people who are coming in as doctoral fellows and helping on this study, they may have absolutely no research experience. And so teaching a consent training to somebody who's never done consent versus somebody who has done consent and they just need to learn how we do it in our study is a very different training experience. And so there might be more coaching involved. There might be more explanation behind certain actions, things that, maybe I may do more explanation in terms of how things promote internal validity and keeping the overall essence of the scientific rigor in mind as a rationale for explaining something. Whereas if somebody's had more research experience, I might not have to do that. Sometimes because we have quantitative and qualitative work going on, and especially because we've had to pull in research fellows to be site coordinators, I've done a lot of work in mentoring doctoral fellows and also graduate assistants in doing study coordination tasks and things, to keep in mind when you're navigating multiple teams and different personnel and interdisciplinary team members and people that aren't on our study IRB, but we could not get referrals without them, and how to navigate conversations like that, as well as people who maybe have never done qualitative coding. And so I'll spend time teaching how to do qualitative coding on some of our session transcriptions or interview transcriptions. And so that's all kind of within the realm of the study coordinator position, or at least something that's of value for Yoka and I, because it's, for us, we don't view working on these studies as just a job, but really as a lot of opportunity to learn how to do things independently on your own and take these skills and be able to apply them to their own research. And so that kind of is at the forefront when we're considering leadership and mentorship. And then in terms of supervision, so I do the quality assurance monitoring for the therapy sessions. But sometimes we also have people like our clinical doctoral students who they are still learning how to be therapists. And so myself being a therapist, I can give input for them that is not specific to the protocol, but specific to different therapeutic processes. And so I can give different perspectives and ask different questions and help them unpack things that arise from a more clinical perspective and less from the research perspective. Any questions on this piece? Navigating systems. I'd say that that is probably one of the biggest pieces. That's probably one of the biggest pieces that has been what we've learned, especially since adding on so many different sites. So before Yoka had done research at Hahnemann, we kind of knew the systems that were there. We built a lot of the research proposal based on her previous research there. She hadn't done as much with Jefferson, but she had a lot of people that were invested early on to give input. Because of Hahnemann closing and us just being forced to be like, how do we scramble and make this work? Every new site that we have added has had different systems. So at Drexel, some of the systems that we have to navigate are research fellowship schedules, because that's who's working a lot on the study. And up until recently, every time there was a quarter break, we lost all of our research fellows. And, you know, anytime somebody was on vacation, or, you know, sometimes there would be 2-week breaks where we'd have 4 fellows gone. And then the only people that were left working on the study to pick up on tasks were people that were paid, you know, as staff on the grant, like myself and Carolina. And so that can be a lot when you're not considering taking on 4 additional tasks, or not getting the assistance that being able to delegate different supports through the fellows can. So that may be something that impacts you if you're working with somebody who has assistants or fellows that do a doctoral program. The Drexel IRB is its own system, as we all know from doing our studies. One of the sites we added was Parkway Health and Wellness. So working with the front desk there, trying to get, you know, make sure room scheduling and stuff is clear, and access to letting people into the building. These can be just the nitty gritties. Same thing with Hahnemann. There were different, you know, areas that you needed to go to for outpatient blood draws. And can you draw blood through the port, or can you draw blood, you know, does it have to be a venipuncture? That differs per site. How do you schedule appointments? Who do you schedule them through? How do you get your referrals? That all has different things. I know at CTCA, Jason's making relationships there, and they want all of the nurses to do all the screening. And so this is the first site where none of the actual research staff will do any screening. The point that will come on is at the point of consent, whereas at Hahnemann and Jefferson, we do all the screening. So there's certain things that we work within their systems, and it can be challenging the more systems that you add in, and keeping those in mind and balancing things and making sure that you're doing pieces according to the study protocol, but also using the infrastructures or supporting the lack of infrastructures at each institution. So any questions on this piece?
Hey, I have a question about this. Did you ever have a situation, and if you don't, maybe just talk about what would be done, where a site, the way that they wanted to do it was not acceptable, either it, you know, moved the protocol too far, or didn't meet some other criteria that you'd set on how the study was to be conducted?
Can you repeat that? Because you came out
Sorry.
in and out a little bit.
My microphone's not the greatest. Did you ever have a situation where when you're working with a lot of different sites, there was a situation where they wanted to do something very differently, or maybe in a way that would bring into question the validity or the scientific reliability of the study, or just was very different from how the study had been planned, where there, I guess, has it ever been so far that you couldn't bend anymore with working with sites?
Not to the point where we couldn't make it work somehow. Sometimes it would just take lots of meetings and lots of discussion. And if we do ever have to argue for a specific procedure, we pull in, this is what we submitted to the NIH, and this is what we have to maintain according to the NIH, who is the sponsor of this study. We pull in, Drexel IRB if it's something at Jefferson because we have an alliance agreement with them. Maybe there's been things that Drexel doesn't require, but Jefferson does. And because they're relying on us, we've had to move our systems at Drexel to be compliant to the additional requirements that Jefferson has. So usually in terms of validity and staying in line with general scope, we pull in the larger systems that we are, that we have to stay committed to. With that, we've had to be really flexible in our thinking, especially because we worked, for a year and some change with the same systems at Hahnemann and Jefferson. When we started adding new sites, we had to constantly say, okay, this is not how we normally do it. Is this outside of the scope of what's compliant with our sponsor and, the IRB? Does this still maintain study protocol? Is this okay to ask other people who are not hired on the study to do this? Or if people, like with CTCA, we would never ask people to do these screens because it's additional work for them, but they won't allow us to do it at their site without them doing that. They just have certain things that they only want us to have access to versus what, like one of the things that has come up between new sites is, well, we can't give you this information because it's HIPAA. And if they haven't signed a consent form, then we're not allowed to give you names and addresses to contact them for referrals. Whereas, we have it written in our protocol that that's how we're going to do recruitment. And so some places they'll say, okay, because that's written. In some places we'll say, it doesn't matter. We're not gonna give you access to that information. We'll do recruitment from our end and then we'll give you that. And so then we have to decide, can we try this out, see if it's gonna work, because we don't want to invest a lot of time, resources, and energy if it's gonna mean that we maybe recruit one person every 2 months versus 5 people a month, because that's the way that they want to do it. So we might pilot something for a little bit if we can't find a compromise, and then we keep track and we document whether it's going to work or not, and then we show from a budget perspective why or why not continue that way and stuff like that. So we try to pull in as much information as possible when assessing those possibilities.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely different when you start a research proposal knowing who's going to be your team, because ideally this is hashed out in your proposal. And even then, there were things that we had hashed out in our proposal that by the time we actually started employing these actions, Jefferson was like, no, we don't do it this way. And we're like, well, why did we put it into the proposal like this if this actually wasn't the way that it was? And so you still may have those things. It's definitely been trickier adding people on after the study has been established and trying to say, this is what we want to do. And they're really excited. They really want to offer music therapy to their patients, but their idea of how this is going to work and our capabilities of making it stay within our protocol might be very different. And we have to be really transparent and really honest and say, I'm sorry, we just can't do that. Or if we did it, we'd have to do it this way. And that's the only way that we can make it work.
Kate, I think those are great points. The challenge of taking a protocol for a clinical trial and then moving it into several sites, just because typically that's not exactly how things are done there. And it may be something you're offering that's new, but even so, I think that's really challenging. So it's congratulations to your group that you've managed to pursue. And I also would agree if people are aboard at the beginning and then are a strong representative of that site, that's useful. But you can't always. That isn't always the case. So
yeah,
those I think are really. I think that's always there's a real skill and an ability to perhaps sort of a relationship-based kind of thing you develop.
Yeah. And you also don't want to, it can be challenging. And this is something I'll kind of talk about in some of the skills required in the communication skills of maintaining what you need to do with your boundaries, but also not wanting to put things in a way that people are put off, or that they don't want to work with you again. So there's a delicate balance between, having to respectfully decline in order to stay within the bounds of what you set out to do versus, kind of just shutting somebody off entirely because you don't want to lose those relationships if they could be helpful in the future. And it may be that you just say, maybe this isn't going to be possible at this time, but hey, let's consider a pilot study that we can draft together that works for both of us and move from that. So it's definitely tricky. Good question. So skills, going into that. Communication. Whew. So much to consider, especially when you have lots of different team members, when you have different team members at different levels of understanding and different levels of training. An incoming first quarter doctoral student is very different for communication than, somebody who's finishing their dissertation and has had a few years of research under their belt. And in terms of how people's motivations are different, their feedback styles are different, their support styles are different, their communications are different. Email communication, no matter how well you try to write something, can still come off in ways that you cannot control. Talking with other team members and some of the, challenging conversations that I shared with relation to the systems, it's really important to maintain a constant level of awareness of how somebody is going to receive the information. And sometimes that can be challenging, and you have to take the time to learn how each person likes to have their communication, likes to be talked to, and likes to be, what's their level of ability for constructive criticism. How can you help somebody develop in areas of growth in a way that is inspiring and motivating and not deflating? There's just a lot of things involved in, if things arise between team members, how do you navigate that? There's a lot of diplomacy involved, and also just listening to, people and their frustrations, or people and the things that are working well, and pulling everybody together. And I think one thing that is fantastic about our team is we're all willing to have hard conversations if things aren't working well, and we're all open to be able to work and come together and brainstorm things that will help move us forward. But that can take a lot to get to that place, to develop that within a team. Time management skills, that can be, so again, I'm technically only 20 hours a week, because as much as Yoka wrote in a full-time study coordinator position, which I think very easily could be, the NIH came back and said, no, that's not necessary. That's too much. And so she had to cut it down to 20 hours a week. And there are times when I spend well over 20 hours a week doing these tasks, and knowing that, that's only part of my job. For me, it takes a lot to be able to say, okay, today I'm not working on the RO1. I have publications, right? I have my grant that I got to work on. I have these things that I got to do. And so managing your time, helping others manage their time is really important, because some people may be coming into this without understanding how to spend a certain amount of hours on a task and not 10 hours on a task. How much is too much detail versus little detail? How efficient is somebody? How much support does somebody need? And all of those can play into how much time I spend on things. So I know, like, one thing I always say with the folks that I work with when I train them, I'm like, when you're first training and you have some questions, like, definitely ask me. But after a couple months, you know, you really should be able to start doing this on your own, and try to go to the manual before asking me a question, because I wrote these manuals so that I'm not having to respond to 15 different people each day asking a question that's already written in the manual. And so I even made quick reference guides, because the manuals are so exhaustive that how can I make like a little thing that's like, you need this, go here. Here's a frequently asked question, go here. Because I can easily spend an entire day just answering emails from coordinating different things from people, and that's not the most efficient use of my time. And the organizational skills kind of go into that. We maintain so many logs, all the Excel logs in the world, logs for our CLIN card payments, logs for training, logs for competency, logs for QA management, logs for study task completion, for screening enrollment. There's logs galore, which help. They can be tedious, but they can really help keep us organized, and they help keep me on track for where I'm moving and things. And, you know, I have my own systems of using my calendar for updates for things when I have to plan out things that are 3 months in advance or 6 months in advance, or, you know, do we have somebody who needs to be hired as a non-employee associate that they're gonna expire in a year, and I have to put something, you know, like, you just kind of have to be really detail oriented and really organized. I think it applies to all research, but I know for coordinating multiple sites, multiple people, those are the things that I employ the most. So then lastly, challenges, facilitators, and opportunities. So obviously I've talked about losing Hahnemann. That was a real gut punch. Adding new sites and navigating new systems. And then obviously the COVID-19, that's impacting everybody right now, but that's surely been its own thing to navigate in terms of how to keep moving things forward when so many of us are being paid from a federal grant, and making sure that we're justifying our time on this grant. And things move at such a fast pace. You know, we get updates from Jefferson, we get updates from Drexel, we get updates from the state, updates from the government, things that we can do, things that we can't do, things that we can do in limited abilities. And all of these require constant revisions to the IRB and sending things for approval and conversations with program officers. So that's, you know, any kind of shift does need to go through its own stratosphere of people. I'd say the things that make this job the best is our team. Like, our team is literally the best team ever. I love everybody that's on our team. I'm so appreciative. I learn so much from everybody. Everybody's so receptive and eager to learn and eager to help out. And, you know, somebody takes a vacation, everybody's like, let me know what you need. And everybody's so willing to jump in that it would make it so much more challenging if we didn't have that strong team. And I know it can be hard to find that team, especially if you have people coming in and out. I'd say having Yoka as a mentor has been a saving grace. And I still have Dr. Sherry Rabb, who I did my research practicum with, as a mentor. And being able to just constantly go to them with questions. And it may be just, how do I approach this situation? It's like maybe a really nuanced interpersonal communication thing, and we can just talk it out, and it's not even logistics, but just having somebody that I can go to and say, like, look, this is really hard to keep, you know, juggling all these balls and have these spinning plates and not have them all come crashing down because you have to do so much at the same time. And having somebody that I can talk to is really helpful, and to say, you know, I went through that too. This is what I did. You know, you pull through it. This is really helpful. This helped me on this study. And it's, you know, just kind of the general mentorship that we get. And then I'd say the opportunities, you know, I got to write on an administrative supplement NIH grant, which was a great experience that got funded. I am doing a multi-site clinical trial for a research grant that I just got in the fall. And I don't think that I would have been as strong in grant writing and conceptualizing a study if I hadn't had all this experience, because I feel like I'm way more prepared to know what resources I need, what are my timelines, what can I realistically do, who can I hire, what can I do by myself, what am I going to need help with, how much effort do I need to put forth. And if I hadn't been working on this, I really wouldn't know that as in depth. So yeah, that's the nuts and bolts.
I had a question on that last slide. So thinking about this sort of in the future for us, when we are PIs and say are hiring our own coordinators, what sort of is helpful from the PI's perspective to make this process better, easier?
Well, I won't speak for yoga.
Hypothetically speaking.
Right. Well, I'll share from because I'm the PI of my grant. And so this is the first time that I had to consider who's going to help me be a site coordinator.
Right.
And one person was, I have a team continuing for my dissertation research that I'm having. But when I was approaching, like I asked Jacelyn to help me with my study. Because I've seen her be very detail oriented. I've seen her be able to creatively work through things. I've seen her be efficient. I've seen her work with other people and do that well. So when I'm looking at knowing all that's required of the position because I'm in it, it makes it easier for me to know who is going to be successful in this and who might not. If somebody is not detail oriented, it's just not going to work. Really, I know it's so simple, but you have to be able to multitask. You have to be able to be detail oriented, and you have to have some leadership quality to know that you can't be afraid to just take on a meeting and just control it, or take on, training people and just getting into it. There's certain qualities that if, maybe you're a little quieter, more refrained, or, you have to be able to set boundaries, but also be innovative and creative with your ideas. And so that was something that I looked for. And I know since I was doing my advanced research practicum, part of my coursework was writing papers about what I was learning. And I remember at some point, Yoko was reading my papers because she was, part of the grading of that. And she was like, oh my gosh, okay, at this point, you know more than I do about navigating multi-site clinical trials. If I get this study, I want you to apply because,
right.
You have more knowledge than I do at this point. But I'd also worked with her because I'd been her research fellow, I'd been her TA, so she'd had evidence at that point. So I'd say, it's different if you know somebody versus hiring, from out of the blue.
Yeah.
Just know that somebody needs to be able to navigate a lot of communication, a lot of tasks. And by no means, I definitely drop the ball now and then, and somebody will hey, did you send this? And I'm like, nope, sure didn't. Sorry. There's just things that will fall through. But when that can be 5 to 10% of the time and 90% of the time, you can be pretty on point with doing things. I would feel confident in hiring somebody in that position. And it, having prior research experience helps. But I think
the other question, how much does the domain knowledge, particularly with the training, I wondered.
So it's helpful to have research experience because when you're navigating multiple people, you want to be able to have an understanding of a study conceptually. And I think that helps in your training. You could have worked in lots of administrative positions, but if you don't have research experience, then you won't have a context for why you're training people on certain things and certain tasks. I had to learn a lot about cancer care that was not my area. but I knew mixed methods research, I knew mechanistic research, I knew qualitative research. That when people ask me questions on why we're doing it, I can come out and say, you know, this is for credibility. This is for internal validity. We want to make sure that we're reducing this bias. We want to, you know, you have to have some of that background knowledge because it's going to help the people that you're training to understand more why they're doing what they're doing and what are the decisions behind that, as opposed to just following a set of instructions and doing that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I didn't want to hog it, but thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kate. That was great.
Glad you liked.
Hey, you're a seasoned veteran. Very impressive.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for this opportunity, and you know, I don't want to be a study coordinator forever, but I really, I don't think that I'd feel nearly as comfortable moving forward with research without having had this experience. So I think even if you get a chance in your own research to coordinate, even at a pilot level, it can be really helpful in informing bigger scale stuff